Hello, Canucks fans, and welcome back to, I guess, the final episode of the Canucks Conversation for the regular season. The week is over. We made it through the final few games for the Vancouver Canucks. We are at the end. My name is Chris Faber. Joining me in studio here is Harmon Dial. Our producer is Alex Allard, who's a minor soccer fan. This show is presented by the great folks over at Zephyr Epic. And I think you can tell now from YouTube, and I wonder if you can hear it differently on the podcast. I've got no mic anymore. I got my headset here, which I'm feeling pretty good about. My left hand feels so weird because it's always holding on to the mic. And like it's been like that for years and years. But when I started the show, and you'll remember this, you were on the fifth episode of the show when it started. It was just like a mic standing alone. I didn't have to hold it. But then for about, it would have been about 350 episodes of this show, which is a lot of hours. That's a lot of hours. I've had a mic in my hand, but I got this headset now, and I'm very happy with it. Well, like my left hand does it, like when you lift weights and you lift like it's like swinging a bat in baseball. I don't know if they do this in cricket, but you put like a weight at the end. So you take a couple warm-up swings and then you put it down, you take the weight off and the bat feels light. My left arm feels like I could pick up Rogers Arena right now with my hand. Like it feels great. It feels nice.
Yeah, Donnie and Dolly vibes with the headset.
Yeah, I like it. I hope it doesn't affect the audio too much because I know the mics are awesome for picking up audio. So far, it's so good. Listen, I spent some money on this. This wasn't a $40 one. I have a $40 one. It sucks. I was going to give it to you. I had another crappy one, but I don't even want to. It's horrible. Harm, how you doing? Season's over, baby.
Yeah, now we begin the annual big summer for the franchise. I mean, it's funny to hear Rick Tocchet sort of emphasizing, how many times he brought up a big summer for the players. It's a big summer for management in deciding the next chapter for this Canucks team after I think what we can all agree was a disappointing season. And in typical Canuck fashion, we see all these lows throughout the season, and yet they don't even finish with the top 10 draft pick. Typical Vancouver.
It is, and that is our first topic on the show here. The 11th best odds. The Vancouver Canucks, they're in the lottery for Connor Bedard. It just could not get any worse. They are the lowest percent of landing the first overall pick. They have a 3% chance of landing Connor Bedard. It's tough because they're in the mushy middle again. As the season concludes here, you're in the mushy middle again. The Vancouver Canucks with a 3% chance of moving up and getting the first overall pick, a 3% chance of moving up and getting the second overall pick. We see Alex Allard, our producer here, ripping through Draft Lottery Simulator. He could probably do it. You'd have to do it about 20 times. More than that to get your odds right on that. So it is what it is. Hey, we were saying this weeks ago, they were sitting at like 6%. We're like, yeah, that works. That works for us. But at this point, hey, the season's over. I think that is, to me, the best thing about last night's game was that hopefully you can move on from what this season just was. Because you mentioned it. We heard Bruce Boudreau say it at the start of the year. It would be disastrous if the Canucks missed the playoffs this year. He couldn't have been more correct with his assessment. The Canucks missed the playoffs this year, and I think one of the words you can use for this season is disastrous.
Yeah, no doubt. And we saw all sorts of different drama, right? In terms of the way that, for example, the Bruce Boudreau firing was handled. I don't think that left a positive impression on on the rest of the hockey world. The way the Tanner Pearson injury was dealt, the Rachel Dory human rights complaint that was filed, right? The point is there's been a lot of drama beyond just what's happened on the ice, which I think has compounded things. And it's at least, what you're hoping for at this point is at least some of the positive vibes you got at the end with, Elias Pettersson crossing the 100-point mark, with Thatcher Demko finding his game again, with the club at least showing some level of improvement under Rick Tocchet. All you can really hope is that it translates. Like, I really hope it translates because let's be honest, like, after the way that they've gone about things, even going out and aggressively making the Filip Hronek trade, clearly sort of, putting themselves in the spot where they're 11th from bottom. And look, nobody expected the Canucks to, totally bottom out and be, let's say, a bottom 3 or 4 team, but there was a legit shot for them at one point to be a bottom 5, bottom 6 team.
Yeah, there's points in the season where that felt like that's the way it was going to go.
And not
there's
even,
a lot of excitement there.
And the other thing too is it's not just about Connor Bedard, right? Yes, that's the big prize is Bedard and enhancing your odds. But I'd also much rather just draft 5th or 6th overall than 11th, right? That's a big part of it too. So after all that, like this better freaking translate to next season. Otherwise, I don't even want to think about what will happen if it doesn't. If the team has another type of start as as they did this year, and that's why there's going to be a ton of pressure on management to find solutions.
I find it almost like the carnival games. There's like the one where you shoot the basketball. There's one where you like throw the darts at the balloons. The draft lottery and the way that the draft works is more like the balloons. It's like you don't have to make the perfect shot like you have to do in those basketball games at this, down at the PNE or wherever you're going. You don't have to make the shot. You just want to throw that dart and have it hit something. And with the Canucks, it makes it very difficult with the 11th spot because there are about 7 guys in this draft that are very high in the upper echelon of what you're getting as a prospect. After that, there are some players that if you're looking at a position of need, it's more of something you can fill with that pick. Like the 11th overall pick isn't going to get you a top 10 player in this draft. They're going to go like that. They're all forwards and they're all going to go. That's at the time of the draft. It's about how you develop players from there out. And that's going to be very interesting to see what the Canucks do with that pick. Is it spent on a defenseman? Is it spent on a center? They can't use this pick to draft a winger, which I think you take that out.
No, if it's the best player available, you take the best player available.
Really? I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know after 10. I'm a little bit different. I understand first round pick. Take it. I get the notion behind it. I don't know. I don't know if I would do that.
Look, from my perspective, the Canucks took that standpoint and obviously it was a higher draft pick. It was 5th overall in 2016, but they sort of took we already sort of have a power forward in Jake Virtanen. We don't need Matthew Tkachuk. And so what we really need is a defenseman. So they took Julev over Tkachuk. Like, just take the best player available. This team isn't just one piece away. This team, if you land another star, even if it's a winger, you take that all day and you run.
If you're telling me it's a top 5 pick or a top 10 pick even, and even in this draft, I feel like it's top 7, I'm 100% with you. Best player available. But I don't think you can for sure tell me that the winger that's available at 11, who is the best on people's rankings, will be better than the defenseman that's there at 17. So I really think this draft specifically, after you get out of that top 8, I really think there's a lot of pretty good talent, but they're all kind of in the same class. Like in this draft, it feels like from 10 to about 40, which really sucks that the Canucks gave away their 2nd round pick. Because then you're probably finding best player available at 40 who feels like a first rounder to you. But in my eyes, this draft, like I think the Canucks would really benefit long term from drafting. Not necessarily forcing a position, but if a position presents itself and you have to make an argument, and hey, maybe this prospect's a little bit higher up in our projections, I would go with the player on 11. I would in this situation.
Yeah, I understand it if it's a sort of like if all else is very similar, then that could be a decisive edge. And for sure, it's preferable if the players available at 11 end up sort of filling the needs that the Canucks have on the back end and down the middle at center ice. I just think you have to be careful not to sort of force it. And that's always...
That's the key. You can't force it at that point. I do agree with you.
The other point, too, is people say, oh, who cares? If they're 11th as opposed to, let's say, 5th or 6th overall, or even 8th. I'd like to point out the 2019 NHL draft. The Vancouver Canucks loved Trevor Zegras. I know this for a fact. I've spoken to people in the front office because I did an article last year on hypothetically what could the Canucks have looked like? Who could they have drafted if they didn't consistently fall in the draft lottery every year?
That must be fun to write.
Yeah, I mean, it was a cool hypothetical. And I guarantee you if Trevor Zegras was still on the board and he obviously ended up going to Anaheim 1 pick before the Canucks would have taken Zegras. See, like they were all over Zegras. So it's like in that type of scenario, 1 pick, could you imagine the difference between like I love Vasily Podkolzin, but could you imagine having Pettersson and Zegras down the middle? And I'm not pointing to that as an example of the Canucks didn't tank properly that year, that's their fault. Right? Because I don't think the Canucks necessarily had control over that in that year in terms of where exactly they drafted. The point is just to illustrate that, yeah, sometimes the difference in a few draft slots here or there does matter.
To that argument, then, for best player available, you could say, I think going into that draft, Vasily Podkolzin was higher ranked. There was questions about the KHL, but as a player, you could say, like in my eyes, Podkolzin was a more valuable asset to pick than Trevor Zegras at the time.
I don't
at
think
the
it was
draft,
a consensus.
I think so.
I don't think it was a consensus.
I can agree with that.
I mean, I
but
remember.
Does the Russian factor not come into equation there? That's where I think.
Even outside of the Russian factor, yes, there was a lot of buzz, no doubt, about Podkolzin sort of earlier in the year, people looking at him as a potential top 5 pick. But like a lot of people looked at Zegras in that sort of way too. And I remember when, I can't remember who it was, whoever picked 7th. After that, I had a tweet that, all right, the Canucks will have a shot at one of Zegras, Caulfield, or Boldy. I think I tweeted something like that. I didn't even include Podkolzin on there. And, obviously Zegras ended up going, but the point was still like, I was looking at the U.S. national team development program guys and being like, oh, like they got a shot at one of those guys. Honestly, going into the draft, Podkolzin wasn't on my radar in terms of like I expect the Canucks to take him if he's there at 10th overall sort of thing. I definitely disagree with it.
At 10. That's what I thought of the draft.
I didn't know what to make of his situation because of the Russian factor, but I would heavily disagree with the notion that it was a consensus. I think it was split. I think it was like, it depends on how you would view it, and yeah, even internally, the Canucks definitely valued Zegras ahead of Podkolzin. So
right, and that's where it ultimately comes down to, is how Vancouver would value. You brought it up, like Zegras would have been a great option. He's more of a center, that's for sure. Tough to go back to that draft, because it's like that United States national team, basically half of the first 15 picks.
Yeah.
7 players of the first 15 came from that United States national team development program organization. Incredible stuff there. I think just with this pick, and we'll talk about the draft pick a little bit here, with it being 11th, I think opens the door even more for us to see a trade happen. And is that what I want? No, I'd like a prospect. I'd love to see David Reinbacher be there. This is why I'm telling you, maybe not best player available, but best player.
I like Reinbacher.
Yeah, for sure. And that's the thing. Like, I think he's going to end up going top 10.
Yeah.
Like, I think he's the riser.
Exactly. Like, I think that's there's always a defenseman that teams reach for.
Of course.
They always, like, we saw it with Seider. We saw it with Korchinski last year. There's always a defenseman that people reach on, and Reinbacher is the consensus top D.
Yeah. Well, it's like what Alex knows this, our producer from Ottawa, Jake Sanderson, going 5th overall, right? Like that feels like a little bit of a stretch at that point, especially looking back now at that draft and seeing some players that went later on. There have been massive impact players. That's what's going to be interesting. It's like today, the day that we are in currently, April 14th, we're looking at the draft rankings. We haven't yet had the opportunity to evaluate playoff play. And one thing I know about general managers and how they are going to evaluate draft prospects, and listen, it's Patrick Allvin's call here with the 11th overall pick. He's going to either use it to draft a very high-end prospect, or he's going to use it to trade for I would say, pretty high-end NHL player that's going to play on your roster next year. These are the options for him. I also think it's, like I said, with playoff play coming up for a lot of these guys, whether it be CHL play, overseas, anywhere where they're playing hockey, where these top prospects are at, the playoffs is going to have a massive impact on how general managers view them. And a lot of these players haven't had that chance yet. They haven't finished. The SHL is still going on. Allsvenskan's still going on. CHL is just starting to warm up into their playoffs. So it will be interesting to see how different you're looking at players by the time we're actually like 2 weeks out from the draft. Like, are there actually defensemen in the conversation for the top 10? Because aside from David Reinbacher and maybe Axel Sandin Pellikka in certain people's eyes, like, I don't see a defenseman going into the top 10 in this draft. It's just so full of forwards, specifically a lot of centers. So that's the way I look at it. It's like, I don't think that best player available has to be the way you look at it with 11th. I think you can go, but you mentioned it, like, you can't force it. If it's something that presents itself to you, and it is, hey, listen, we like, I'll just use Jonathan Lekkerimäki as an example. Like, we really like Lekkerimäki. We think he's a top, let's say at the time the Canucks were like, he's a top 7 talent in this draft. We're going to draft him instead of maybe reaching for the guy who's about 18th, like in an Owen Pickering type of situation, the big defenseman last year. Would they look better on today's day if they drafted Owen Pickering? Maybe. Pickering was the captain of his team in the OHL. He played really good, tons of minutes, Team Canada, all that stuff. Kerry Mackey didn't have a good year. This is 1 year out. It's hard to really figure out who's going to be the better NHL or even 1 year away from the draft. And I think that's what makes it so difficult with the 11th overall pick is you're out of that high-end elite class of this draft. You're really starting to get, unfortunately, into like the mushy middle of the first round pretty much, where the Canucks have put themselves there from being in the mushy middle of the standings. So I'm going to be very interested to see what they do. I think with it being 11th, though, and we'll have to see what happens in the draft lottery, it's still possible. It's all possible that they can go move up, and it could be Fantilli or Bedard, and we'll never have to have this conversation again. That would be awesome. But I think with them sitting at 11th, 11th overall pick feels like one that gets traded. It just has that feeling to it to me.
No.
Like you're not even going to entertain this? I think it's really possible.
No, I'm not sort of disagreeing with the premise. I absolutely like that's a worry. I'm saying no in the sense of like I really hope it doesn't happen.
Yeah, for sure.
Like no, is it like please no? Like that's what I was saying no. Like that's what I meant. God no.
I think here's the thing about 11th, and I see some people in the chat mentioning this, to trade down from 11. That's the other option. It's like,
see, I wouldn't mind that
do
at
you
all.
really believe that 11 is that much better than 20 in this draft? I personally
for
don't.
that, I have no problems with, especially if considering you've already traded your second round pick away. If you look at it as there isn't a significant drop off between, let's say, 11 and even 20, and you net an extra, let's say, second round pick for it, you add another high end prospect to your system. I'm 100% on board. I want, like, for sure, consider it.
Yeah,
sign me up, but just don't trade it for a player,
the
who's
left
like,
shot guy to play with Hronek.
Like, please, not a guy who's like 23 and who's already off his ELC or like 20. Like, no, please, you just can't build a cup contender trading your first round pick away every year.
No, because it's something you and I touched on about a month ago, was not evaluating players just for what they do on the ice, but really general managers who are doing a good job are evaluating value. And that's what they're building their team off. You have incredible value from an ELC. Like, that's the best value you can find in the NHL right now, is getting a star on their ELC or a guy who just even shows well. Like, I think that's something that doesn't get talked about a lot, is these players on their ELCs. Yeah, you get a McDavid, you're like, okay, awesome. Bedard's going to be incredible on his ELC. He's going to be so valuable. But look at some other players who are like good examples. Like, think about Brady Tkachuk's first few years in Ottawa on his ELC, like really making a massive impact on a team. And I know that's a top 5 pick, a little bit kind of different at that point. But what's another example? Like
even like a Brock Besser when he arrived in the league, like off his ELC. It's like if you get a guy who can.
Well, think about Noah Dobson, like what he did. In it. Like these type of players on their ELCs are so important. There's such value there that you're throwing that value away to make the trade. But I guess at that point you're making the argument of, okay, it's still a little bit worrisome. Like, hey, Vitaly Kravtsov was a top 10 pick. He didn't do anything on his ELC. You'd get a better thing if you traded that 9th overall pick for, let's say, Filip Hronek at the time. You would be happy with those 3 years. There's just a lot to manage for this team with that 11th overall pick. I just feel like when it sits there at 11, it has trade written all over it for me, man. The fact that it's not a top 10 pick, it has trade written all over it. Whether it be a trade down option, I think that would be fun. I think that would be good. I'd like to see. I'm down for that. I don't think that's the outcome with the trade. I think the trade is for a player. I think this team wants to be competitive next year. We have media availability this weekend on Monday. We have the general manager and the head coach. It'll be interesting to hear their answers when asked questions.
You're scaring me, Faber. You're scaring me.
Hey, I'm a prospects guy, Harm. I go to sleep thinking about this type of thing. I woke up in the middle of the night last night sweating about Kirby Dach getting moved for that pick or something.
I just can't do another sort of year of like hyping up some, just like, having, somebody like Jack Rathbone being like a top 5 prospect in the system. Like please.
But Harm,
give us some
buddy, you're preaching to the choir, brother. Like, I would love, I think the fact that, and I know we mentioned you guys posted your top 10 count on the prospects. Listen, Aatu Räty is a good prospect, but to me, this is very different from even the time when Podkolzin was the number 1 prospect, or obviously when Pettersson was your number 1 prospect, or when Quinn Hughes is your top. This is completely different levels where Aatu Räty is. And I think if you can find that guy, it's the same thing that happened last season, right? Like going into the draft, everybody said this, whoever they draft with that 15th overall pick immediately becomes the top prospect in the system. I feel like it's the exact same way moving forward here, but I'm curious to see what the organization thinks of. Are there priorities about building the prospect system right now because it still needs help? You still want that number one guy, and you can find him in this draft, or are the priorities from the team to be competitive next season?
The thing about the draft is it's very difficult to find the types of like trying to find a young top 6 center, for example, on a bargain contract. You're gonna have to draft that guy. Nobody's
Yep.
gonna trade that guy.
Mhm.
A legit top pair defenseman who's young, and I'm not talking Philip Pronik already in his mid-20s young, but I'm talking about somebody who, like Quinn Hughes, can be a pillar on your defense. Maybe not as good as Quinn Hughes, but sort of like, I mean, age-wise, sort of coming in and giving you such a long window of value. You're gonna have to draft that guy. You're like, teams aren't gonna trade that sort of piece away. Even like, it's just at the very top end of the lineup when it comes to the rare players that truly move the needle for a franchise. You're generally going to have to draft those guys. It's not easy to find those solutions on the trade market, especially when you're a team that the Canucks don't have a lot of expendable trade chips beyond their own draft picks, which, considering the state of the prospect pool, they shouldn't be dangling in the first place, and considering the lack of cap space.
Mm-hmm. No, I completely agree. And with the point about Quinn Hughes, think about it. He's been he's had 4 full seasons. He was here for the little bit at the end there. You haven't paid him $20 million yet for his services. That's the value we're talking about.
Not only that, when you don't draft and develop them, and I've made this point before, the Canucks under Benning were not able to draft and develop any defenseman besides Quinn Hughes. So what happens? Then you have to go out and overpay in free agency. So you sign Tyler Myers. Then you have to trade for a risky contract like Oliver Ekman-Larsson, because the only way to acquire a player of that perceived caliber in your eyes is to take a bet on a risky contract.
Yeah.
And so you look at where the Canucks are at as a mess today with their cap situation. A big part of it is because they could not draft and develop defensemen, which was created in part because the Jim Benning regime traded away draft picks like candy when they should have been rebuilding.
And hey, you move a first and a second. I'm not saying that this management group has done that and moved draft picks like candy, but I swear, you move a first and a second, that should really, in my eyes, teams that are moving first and second round picks, that signals what this organization's all about in the here and now, and that's winning.
Yeah.
You don't move first and second round picks if you're not here to win right now. I think that's what worries me about this next pick is listen, if it was a 6th overall pick, say that's where the Canucks are picking, I don't think there's a chance they're moving it.
Yeah.
With it being 11th, I can totally see it. And as much as we would like to see them trade down and add a second, or add a second and a 6th, or add a pair of thirds, anything, I don't know if that fits with their vision of winning now. I don't think that. I think if you're talking about listen, what I say what you want about like the best player available at 11th and all that. If you're picking a player at 11th, there's a better chance he's in your NHL lineup before the guy you pick at 21st. That's just the way it's probably going to go. And it's likely that you're getting an NHL player quicker with the 11th overall pick than you are with, say, the 23rd and then like the 100th and the 55th. There's a better chance. So I think that's what makes me think that trading down is probably at the bottom of actually happening with this organization. Unfortunately.
We'll see.
Yeah.
It sort of depends too, because every team's draft board is different.
Yeah, that's true too.
So if they look at somebody who's probably going to go in the 20s as having better
top 10 talent,
top 10 talent, then they may not view that as a step back in terms of, okay, this guy's going to take a lot longer to develop even.
Yeah, I agree. And that probably comes in the equation again, is what position you're drafting to. Defensemen are going to take longer, especially if you're getting a defensive guy, or what's their situation with, are they playing in Europe? Are they in pro hockey? Are they in junior hockey? Are they going to college? Like, there's a lot of things that come into the equation. Luckily, we have a long off season to talk about draft stuff. Let's wrap up a little bit more from the season here. I do want to pull up the final 20 games from the year where the Canucks played pretty well. They had a 13-5-2 record over the final 20 games of the season. Here's the interesting stat from those 20 games. Of the 13 wins they had, I circled them here for everyone on YouTube. They only beat 3 playoff teams in those 13 wins. So, hey, a 13-5-2 record. Is that good, Harm? You're a numbers guy. 13-5-2 is a pretty good record. I would take that. The unfortunate thing is, we all talked about this at the halfway point of the season. We talked about this when Rick Tocchet was hired. This was not going to be a tough schedule that really challenged the players to step up and play in these big moments. And in the big moments they had, they only beat playoff teams 3 times. So how much can you really take from the final 20 games here and think that it's sustainable? It can be moved into next season. We touched on a few things off the top. Pettersson's play, Demko getting back. That's all great. JT Miller playing a little bit better. But is there anything else you can take away from these past 20 that are actually, in your eyes, for sure going to happen next season on this team that are positive?
Well, the most important one is Demko.
Yeah.
Right? Especially coming back from injury. If he struggled down the stretch again, we'd be hesitant, right? You'd probably even have conversations about, like, some would wonder, should they trade? Like, should they trade?
Yep.
And of course now it's like there's no chance of that happening. That's huge because this team, to win something next season, they're going to need exceptional goaltending. It's the bottom line, and the form that he showed was the Demko that we're used to. So I think that's the most important takeaway in terms of what I'm confident in will actually translate to next season. Beyond that, obviously, we know Pettersson and Hughes were fantastic the whole season, as was Kuzmenko. That'll translate to next season in terms of, that trio being able to drive the bus for this team offensively. Obviously, JT Miller sort of turning things around. That's huge. Yeah. That's important because if he struggled at center through the second half of the season again, especially after trading Horvat, and you're looking at him as, oh boy, might have to play him at wing. That's where he's better at. Then all of a sudden, red flags. You're really worried about the situation. So I think that's important. Beyond that, from a team perspective, because of the soft schedule, because we saw them go on a tear into Boudreaux and it didn't translate to next season, I'm not going to try reading too much into it both ways, right? I'm not going to look at this and say, oh, this is phony. This doesn't mean anything, because the club did show strides in terms of playing more responsibly, playing a more diligent style under Tocchet. And I'm optimistic about the impact that he can have next season. But these games also don't mean anything. They're against softer competition. And we've seen that this group last year struggled out of the gate when the games actually mattered. So I'm not going to read too much into it from a team perspective.
I think what I'm questioning for next season, specifically from the pushover from this year into next season, there was a lot of talk about this being an extended training camp, this being a time for the players to learn the system a little bit before. I think that can help more with Tocchet than it did with Boudreaux. So I will be optimistic about that. But I also wonder if they did enough in these final, however many games it was with Tocchet here, about half the season. Did they do enough to really exhaust all avenues of making this a training camp? Did they give players opportunities enough? Like, they did a lot of, like, hey, listen, Akito Hirose getting a chance to play NHL minutes late in the season, top 4 minutes, really. Him on the power play, that was all great. But did they do enough trial and error from the current roster that they have to think that is like a training camp going into next season? I don't know if they did enough just trying different things in the final games here. I feel like it was more about this training camp, and maybe that's my fault from the way I would read how I'd like to see a team operate in a training camp. Maybe this was more about the structure, how this team wants to play, what you have to do in certain situations, instead of just giving bodies different opportunities.
Well, also don't think that, with Podkolzin, I think that was one example where before he went down with injury, it felt like early under Tocchet, he was building confidence. And then even in the Nashville game, he scored, for example. And I was like, beyond just the goal, his play has looked a lot better. Maybe this can be a point for him to really regain that confidence. And then he was back playing 7, 8, 9 minutes a night. So that was the one area that I looked at and disagreed with. Beyond that, there wasn't a lot.
No, I think they did a fine job of it. They just didn't.
Right. Like, I don't look at Vitaly Kravtsov, for example, like what? He didn't do anything to deserve a greater opportunity.
I think the thing that I'm picking apart is very small. It's like, why didn't McDonough get on the power play in that spot that he was really good at? Why didn't we see more, I guess, opportunity for Jack Rathbone maybe to see what it looks like on a coach? Like I said, I'm kind of nitpicking.
I just don't think there were, like, I didn't see anything among the blue line prospects, in terms of like, oh, why didn't they give that guy an opportunity? Because I understand why the organization's down on Rathbone, especially now that they already have Hirose, and among the forwards besides Podkolzin, and like you said, maybe a bit of an opportunity on second power play unit or a little bit more time with, let's say, Conor Garland for Aiden McDonough. I didn't really look at that as a failure on the coaching staff's part.
I got a good one here from Nick that I got to bring up. Sorry to cut you off, but Podkolzin on the penalty kill would have been something there. Yeah, that's a great example from Nick in the chat, and a lot of people chatting about this in our YouTube chat. And if you're not live I see a lot of people on Twitter live as well. I didn't know the numbers on the Twitter live, so that's cool too. But with JT Miller's future now, for him to be a Vancouver Canuck, he needs to be a center. Do you think that these conversations with JT Miller happen in the offseason where the team is exploring? I hear some of the stuff that Frank Seravalli is reporting about this, where, he said this yesterday on Halford and Bruff, that 2 first-round picks, they were starting to talk about the Jason Zucker money, how they're going to move that around. If they were getting that far on it from these reports from Frank Seravalli, I can't see a world where you wouldn't trade JT Miller for 2 first-round picks to reset your roster.
I don't understand, who's going to trade you 2 first-round picks?
That's what I'm saying. But I'm listening to Frank Seravalli saying this on radio. Yeah, that's a good point. So I feel like, if the Canucks were looking for more than that, that's what blows me away a little bit. I guess the Zucker money somehow mixed into it.
I don't know. I feel like there's too much.
I don't think it's possible to.
I feel like there's too much. And I understand it, but there's too much speculation for me to look at that and go and be able to assess, what his trade value is definitively and what teams are going to pay for him, and B, like. It's clear that they had some level of conversations and they went pretty deep with Pittsburgh, but I don't know.
Do you have any other team that would make sense? Well, I see a lot of people mentioning, we have Seattle being mentioned, St. Louis, Carolina. Carolina feels like one to me that I would want to explore a little bit. They might need to re-up there a little bit.
They don't strike me as a team that's going to give up.
No, and I don't think so.
2 first-round picks.
Some of the stuff I've heard is they're not. They're a team that, as though it makes a lot of sense in some people's eyes, I don't think there's any interest from the Carolina Hurricanes to get JT Miller.
Yeah, so
that's just what I've heard.
I'll be honest. I don't know how this is going to play out, especially because he's shown a lot better under Tocchet down the stretch. I genuinely don't know, especially because you're already short a center. So if you're a retooling team, having already made the Hronek trade, trying to be successful for next season, are they going to feel confident in being able to replace Miller's value? And now you'll just have Pettersson down the middle?
Here's the argument against that. You trade Bo Horvat, you think this team's into rebuilding situation. And the one consistent thing with the Vancouver Canucks over the past few years is their inconsistency. So nothing would shock me at this point.
Oh yeah, it wouldn't shock me. I'm just saying I don't know. I genuinely don't know one way or another how they would view all of this, because on the other hand, they may also look at it and go, nobody has a problem with JT Miller's point production this season, right? He was right around a point per game. Honestly, nobody expected him to repeat 99 points. So point production this year, check mark. Problem is the two-way form, even with the surge that he had down the stretch. You're talking about a player who, I think before last night's game, at 5-on-5 was still outscored by 13 goals. So, that you didn't win those matchups, and it wasn't by...
There's points in the season you're looking at the Canucks expected goals per 60 against, and JT Miller is by and far the number 1 at worst in the league for expected goals against. That's before
and
Tocchet,
it's
so you can half check mark that with Tocchet at least,
right?
But not a full check mark.
Yeah, so it's how do you view that, especially for a contract that hasn't even kicked in yet?
That's the craziest thing of this whole thing.
So that's you can make a convincing argument both ways, and that's why I look at it and I go, especially for management, it seems like they themselves have always, kind of flip-flopped it, right? First he was supposed to be a trade chip, and we had all those rumors at the last trade deadline. And I know that even internally, they thought it was more likely that they were going to move Miller than keep him. Like
Yeah.
at that time when they took over and they were approaching not this past trade deadline, the first one that Alvin and Rutherford had, they figured that Bo Horvat was more likely to be a long-term Canuck than JT Miller.
One guy had a C on his chest. The other guy was,
And-
both were expired.
Yeah, and then
I
the
get what you're saying.
deeper they got into trade conversations and realized that, okay, they're probably not going to get quite the return they wanted in terms of win now pieces. I think that's when they went, all right, this guy's a 99-point player. Like, let's just lock him up, right? And then, of course, at the deadline, you hear the rumors from a lot of insiders that they at least had talks. So it's like they were open to it even after the Horvat trade. But then now he has this great stretch run again. So, you know what? Like, that's why I'm like, I have no idea. That's my honest answer. I have no idea.
I completely agree with you. And I think that's something we'll be talking about a lot in the offseason. We haven't ironed out our offseason plans yet, but I plan on doing this with you.
Yeah.
I don't know if we'll do it every week, but when there's some sort of news, we'll have to get together. We'll talk about that after the show, and then I'll get that put out. Next week, I need you here Friday, just so you know.
Yeah.
So we'll see about that. Let's move on. I see Alex is getting pissed off in the chat here. He says, he wants to get to the quiet story. And I thought we could bring this up because, listen, we've had some back and forth, some positive, some negative. This is a spot where we can be positive for a little bit. Talk about a storyline from the season that you thought was something that didn't get talked about a lot. Probably got a little bit of conversation. I'm not telling you to dig up some brand new storyline and tell me it on the show here, but I'm talking about a quieter story that impressed you this year with the Vancouver Canucks. What's one that comes to mind when I say that?
Yeah, it's funny because in Vancouver, there's usually nothing that's quiet, right? Like
Yes, that's true.
normally a player like Dakota Joshua might fly under the radar, but not in a market like Vancouver.
Yeah.
When a guy wins an Unsung Hero award, it's like, yeah, everybody knows he's been good. Everybody knows that's quietly been a good story. So I sort of had to think deeper. And for me, it was the performance of quad A players, the sort of bubble guys that you would look at, and how admirably they filled into NHL roles this season. Especially, didn't matter this year because the Canucks weren't even close to the playoff picture, but those are the little margins that make a difference when you're actually in a dogfight for a playoff race and you end up with getting hammered by injuries and, guys are sort of out of place. Looking at somebody like Sheldon Dries coming in and providing competent bottom six minutes. Did he cross 10 goals this season?
I believe I think he did. I'll have to check that.
I think he did. But anyway,
I got two hands to type now. It's great. I can be all quick.
Getting that value out of a guy who makes nothing against the cap, a guy who can play wing and center. That's
11 goals on the year.
That's awesome from a player who's making league minimum. You need that, right? As opposed to a guy who you call up and you get no production out of. Phil Di Giuseppe coming up and proving himself as a possible bottom six piece moving forward.
To add to your quad A players, you can probably add in Hirose into that and just say non-NHLers.
Yeah,
like
Hirose,
you can change your thought there,
Christian Wolanin. Let's go, Christian Wolanin. I can't believe I'm hyping Christian Wolanin up. In the sense that we're hyping up a guy who's probably just a number 6 defenseman, but hey, he was good. Let's see him. And looking even at the way that Juleson came up, Breesbaugh came up.
One of the guys I was going to mention was Neil Zaman fitting in. And listen, I know the offense wasn't there. He had 4 goals and 12 assists on the season. But there were the things that Patrick Allvin talked about. We heard Bruce Boudreau talk about this and Rick Tocchet as well. Like, at least Neil Zaman was always on the right side of the puck. And it feels like you can see that throughout the year where when he goes into a corner battle, there's a lot about body positioning with him. And yes, there's a lot of things he needs to learn about the NHL, how to score goals, how to put up points. I think you can put Neil Zaman in that conversation too.
You need call-ups that don't look out of place.
Bingo.
You need guys that don't kill you. Not every team has that. The Canucks have had that this season.
Yeah, and where do you put all of that success on? Because I would say that's a good job on the pro scouting group.
Yeah, for sure. That, I think, the allure of having Abbotsford so close,
big time,
as a farm system and the development resources and investment they've put into the minor league system, and it's sort of to create this environment where it's appealing for players that are on the bubble to want to sign with the Canucks organization. That obviously relates to recruitment, and I think it's those two main elements.
Okay, I'll do a quick one. I'm just gonna say, and I've said this a lot about the team actually doing a rebuild and situations like that with how the organization has to move. But I think with a certain player, they've done this in the fact of pulling back the string a little bit, not keeping them in the action, taking them out to work on their game, like the way that they're developing in the AHL. And Niels Höglander is kind of a name that I have to bring up off the top because this is a guy who probably can play on, man, like saying 2/3 of NHL rosters, this probably feels low to me. Like, I think Niels Höglander could fit into lineups on a lot of NHL teams. The fact that they wanted to really develop his game and they were comfortable with how development was happening in the AHL, specifically under Jeremy Colleton. I've heard it from these players all year long. It was a great conversation with Danilo Klimovich I had the other day about that. Like, the fact that they did commit to that and Niels Höglander didn't get a call up at any point during the season after he was sent down. There wasn't like a little, even like a 2-week stretch where they gave him a shot again. They really just sent him down there to be like, hey, there's things that you clearly need to work on. The fan base could see that. The fan base could also see the skill in his game. I think I'd give him props to that. That's one of the underreported stories I've talked about is Niels Höglander, because he's not going to get a lot of praise. But in my eyes, like this is going to be a long-term thing that helps him. With him going down to the AHL, having this type of first line minutes, power play time, extra space with the puck on the power play, in-game action, that makes a difference to how a player develops. And then on top of that, I didn't even mention like the defensive side of things, where I really think he has made improvements as the season's gone on. So good on them for that. I think that's another kind of storyline of the AHL has been talked about and how much praise Abbotsford gets from a lot of people about how they've developed players this year. I just think Niels Höglander is an interesting one there for one of the underreported kind of quiet stories from the year.
Yeah, especially since he was initially fast-tracked. So,
because that takes a bold move to take a player who jumped right in, played a season and a half, and just be like, listen, there are things you really need to work on. We're sending you to the AHL. That's a tough conversation.
And they communicated it well.
Mm-hmm.
I think the decision and being able to convey it as, hey, this isn't a punishment. This isn't like we're upset with your game. This isn't, this isn't a step backward for you. This is where we think you have the best opportunity to become the best player in the long run.
Yeah, 5 years from now, he'll probably look back at this time and there'll be a story written about Niels Höglander learning from that AHL stint. Let's get to the next thing. Alex, we're moving along now on the ticker. Pressure on management, because we're going to hear from them on Monday. Mention this. The management group, to me, needs to be bold this offseason. They have to be. They've had 18 months now to gather information. They've made some pretty good moves. They've made some moves that I think are questionable about the future of this team. But to me, now we know this team wants to be competitive next year. I don't think I knew that 18 months ago when this management group took over, and the way they talked didn't sound like they wanted to be competitive this season. The moves have pointed us in a direction now where they have to be competitive next season. They've charted a course for next year with the Filip Hronek trade, the Andrei Kuzmenko re-signing. They have to win games next year. It was a disaster this year to not make the playoffs. It's a disaster times 5 in my eyes if they don't make the playoffs next year, because they've committed that much to next season. Am I putting too much into just next season?
No, I agree with you 100%. And I don't know if bold is the right word for just to sort of describe how management needs to operate. For me, it's creative.
Yeah, I was going to say creative. And you know what? At the same time, the other word I would use here is they need to impress us with some of their moves this offseason. They really need to do that.
Yeah.
If they are going to be this competitive team next season, they need to impress us with what they do.
Right, because being bold is
being bold is trading for Oliver Ekman-Larsson. That was a bold move from Jim Benning.
Jim Benning was bold on many occasions.
Yes, he was.
Right, and it just so happened to be when he had an excess of draft picks and cap space to spend like a drunken sailor. Right, so management doesn't have those resources available to them right now. They're going to have to think outside the box. They're going to have to find more hidden gems. They're going to have more recruitment wins. They got to find some way to get rid of cap space, man. It's not going to be easy, but boy, I'm looking at somebody like Tyler Myers and I'm like, man, you're screwed if you can't find a way to move that contract. Yeah. Like, that sucks.
Mm-hmm. I think on top
you can still
of that,
make I don't want to be over dramatic. You can still make the playoffs next season, even if you can't like sort of move that contract. But I'll tell you this, it makes it a whole hell of a lot easier if you can find a way to ship him out and be able to do something with that cap space.
I also look at it as like, We talked about the moves, creative, impressive, bold, whatever you want to call it. If they don't make the playoffs next year, it's crazy to think that within 30 months of taking this job, not even, this management group's in the hot seat.
Oh, yeah.
If they don't make the playoffs next year,
Oh, yeah.
they are, and listen, there are things that are out of management's control that could keep them out of the playoffs. If Thatcher Demko isn't healthy and on his game next year, I don't see this team making the playoffs.
Yep.
That's out of management's control if he can stay healthy and on his game throughout the season.
But to counter that, I still think that would be their fault because look at Seattle. Seattle in the second year of their existence has made the playoffs with I can't remember the exact number, but their team save percentage is like 887 or something.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Like their goaltending has been barely competent the whole year. And you're telling me a second-year expansion team still found a way to make the playoffs and did it comfortably? Like, if you're a management team and your bet for making the playoffs is the only way we can get in is if we get elite goaltending, you've already failed, in my opinion.
Seattle, you brought it up. No goaltender on Seattle has a save percentage above 900 this year of the 3 goalies they've ran through.
And,
wow, that's crazy.
And this
that's
season
impressive.
should prove to you that if you're reliant on it, like you can't solely be reliant on elite goaltending because look at what happened to Demko this year. This is what happens to elite goaltenders sometimes, right?
Yeah.
Look at the number of high-end goaltenders that Carey Price in the prime of his career had a season. I think it might have been the 2017-18 campaign where he was a flat 900. You're telling me arguably the best goaltender of the last generation. If he can be human for a whole season, anybody can be human for a whole season. Look at Jacob Markstrom, Vezina finals last year, craps the bed for Calgary this season. Tristan Jarry in Pittsburgh had a great start. He'd become one of Pittsburgh's most important players, but then he gets hurt, and in the last 19 games that he played, he was below 900. That's one of the reasons that Pittsburgh missed the playoffs. And before you say, oh well, look, they're a good team. Like Pittsburgh's a good team, and because they didn't get goaltending, they didn't make the playoffs. So, you need it. Well, Pittsburgh's front office just got fired today because of that.
Yeah.
So, like, there are consequences for this. Calgary, there are Brad Treliving's future is up in the air. He may not be back next season. There's a decent chance that he gets fired. So, that's not going to fly as an excuse next season.
No, and if that's what I'm like. We could be at a very interesting point next year, 1 year from today, if the Canucks do not make the playoffs, because they've committed some of their future. In the 18 months that this management group has been here, they've committed some of their future to being competitive next season already. They've made that bet. They made that bet when they traded for Hronek, because listen, Hronek's going to be good next year, and then he needs a contract after that, right? He's only got 1 more year. You committed to Kuzmenko. He's probably going to be fine next year, too. He's going to score goals for you. Probably score goals for you after that. But, you're betting on those guys being good in those 2 years that you gave up assets.
Team success.
Yeah.
For those bets to pay off, right? Because somebody like Kuzmenko, great player, but he's a UFA in 2 years. So you need to win something in that window. Otherwise, it's like...
a pointless contract, yeah.
Right. So... again, that's not to say that the path that management has chosen is destined to fail, because there are avenues for them to make this work, be successful.
Yep.
But this is a high stakes position, and next season matters a lot.
It is. And to me, this team will not miss the playoffs if Thatcher Demko is on his game. But goaltending, to me, is the hardest thing to bet on in hockey. So we'll have to see what happens.
Another example, look at Freddie Anderson in Carolina, right? Again, same sort of thing. I can't remember if he was I don't think he was a Vezina finalist, but he was top 5 goalie last year. Across the board, had an outstanding season. And this year he was hurt, and I think he had a 904 save percentage this season. This happens to really good goaltenders.
Yeah, 4th in Vezina voting last year.
There you go.
And you fall off to a 903 this season.
And that's the difference, right?
That's the other thing. He was 895 the year before being 4th in the Vezina voting. It's not like he built up to that Vezina thing there. It's the
Goaltenders are
hardest thing to bet
so
on.
hard to. I mean,
But
you
it's
even
also
look
the
at,
most important thing the Canucks are betting on for next year. They know what they have with their forward group. They know what they have to do to their defense group. They are going to make changes to defense core. They're not changing the goalie. They're bringing back Thatcher Demko next year, and they need him to be good. There's so much pressure on him.
There's pressure on whoever's the backup.
Yeah, that too.
Like, that's important, especially if you look at Demko. Even down the stretch here, we saw him play excellent, and then as the workload became a lot, there were a couple slips, and then they gave him a little bit of rest, and then it was like, all right, he got back to that form. You're not going to be able to ride him for 65 starts.
Yeah.
We saw him even last season start to break down a little bit, got hurt at the end of last season. Like, in today's NHL, you can't ride your starter into the ground. You need a backup who can step up and give you really competent play. I'm optimistic that Spencer Martin can bounce back. So, he's an option, whether it's him, whether it's Seelovs, whether it's, you find somebody else. But, you're going to need that. It's not just on Demko. But, yeah, I mean, goaltending is going to be essential for next year. And like you said, if they get it, then all of a sudden you're in a much stronger position to make the playoffs.
Yeah, it's the biggest deciding factor next year for me, if they make the playoffs or not. It's, it's not, is Pettersson going to take another step? Is JT Miller going to play defense?
Well, they also do need the blue line
for sure
and the team's defensive form as a whole to be what it has been in the second half as opposed to the first half, because even when it struggled in the first half, like, let's be honest, the defense was a tire fire. And I'm not talking just the blue line. The amount of backdoor plays that they allowed, cross seams, the penalty kill being disastrous again.
We could see it from the press box. Like, they're going to pass it to this guy in the slot who has this. You could see, we were watching it happen.
All the turnovers that led to on-man rushes against, like, it was, you could have had Dominic Hasek, the prime version of Hasek in net. And he wouldn't have been able to make up for all of those defensive flaws. So that's an important part of the equation too, and that's where they need to get much better play from the blue line.
Absolutely. We'll wrap things up. We've already gone a little over here with some odds and ends. I did want to bring up. I saw Rick Dollywall tweeting about this. I heard the same thing. Canucks are not in on SHL free agent Hardy Haman Akhtel, who's probably the top European prospect or top European free agent in this year's class. I'd say he's the top guy. Like, you can make an argument for some players, but in my eyes, best player available. Hardy Haman Akhtel, and he's a defenseman. So yeah, I mentioned that they're not in on him. That's what I heard. Ed Dollywall reported it too, so it's obviously happening. Locker room clear out is Saturday. Media availability beginning at 10:30 for us to deal with all the players. That's going to be a long day going through all those players there. And then here's the interesting thing for Monday. We did get this from Canucks PR. Patrick Alvin and Rick Tocchet to meet with the media on Monday. You think Rutherford's going to be there? There was no mention of him.
It seems like
he's still out. He's out in Abbotsford. He's still out doing things. It's not like he's hiding.
Yeah, I don't think he's hiding. I just think that after the Boudreau drama and after his criticism of the team's structure got so much play in the market, I think he's realized that, like, it's best if I. And he said it in that press conference. Like, I'm probably gonna be more careful about what I speak.
Did he say zip it? Is that was the word?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And not only that, and plus, I think Alvin's become a lot more active in, like, this is his show now. And I think Rutherford doesn't want to be dominating presence.
Yes.
I think that's part of it too.
I think that's probably part of him in this role too. Why he's not a president and GM or something like that. One more thing I wanted to get to just before we wrap up, and we'll bring Alex Allard, our producer, in for this one as well. Producer Alex is going to jump in. Can we get the NHL playoffs up here, Alex, first? I just wanted to ask you, and there's still one thing that can change. Colorado, who's playing Nashville tonight, they could end up jumping and swapping places with the graphic we're showing here. They could end up playing Seattle. So you can kind of pick your series here. Which one of these series, and everything's set in the East, so go crazy with which one you want to go with here. Harm, we'll start with you, then we'll go to Alex after. Which series to you is one that you cannot miss for the opening round of the NHL?
Oh, Rangers Devils.
Rangers Devils, eh? Okay.
Oh, that's going to be so much fun. Seeing the Hughes brothers, man, that Devils team is so much fun to watch. And the rivalry between the Devils and the Rangers, like, that's going to be one heck of a series to watch.
I'm excited for that one as well. Well, Alex, we'll get your take here. We got some. We need some East Coast swinging in here, and everybody in the chat, let us know what your favorite one is. Jesse says Minnesota and Colorado. That would be a pretty fun one. I don't see anybody else. Alex, what do you got? Which one sticks out to you here about the can't miss series for the opening round?
Can't miss series. I think it's out west. I think it's close between Vegas and Winnipeg and Edmonton, LA. I guess I'm gonna be a company man. I'm going Edmonton.
Oh, they're gonna love that in Edmonton. Yeah, I think that'll be a lot of fun. I'll go with a different one.
Anybody excited for Dallas, Seattle?
No, I don't think there's
anybody's
much in the Central that gets me excited. Like, who's coming out of the Central? Colorado. How are they going to get there?
I mean, Colorado doesn't have Landeskog though.
That's a big loss.
And they
right.
They don't have Kadri driving that second line anyway, so they don't have nearly as much depth. Makar's uncertain in terms of his injury situation. Like, this Avs team isn't the same as it was last year. Although the problem for Minnesota is I think they're going to start the series without Eriksson Ek, which decimates their center situation.
Yeah, that's really tough. With Alex, I see Drew Magnus agreeing with you as well. Alex, are you going with that one just for excitement? From the excitement you're going to see from those two teams?
I think those two series, they're just they're two tight teams. You don't really know where it'll go. They've played each other well.
Yeah. No, I'm with you there too. I think those are that's a hard one to pick, right? That's a hard one to pick. I'll just go with Toronto and Tampa Bay as mine, just to kind of throw another one in there. Listen, my favorite time of the year
is the first round in the Toronto Maple Leafs.
Every single day you got hockey, sometimes starting at 1 o'clock, rolling all the way till 10 o'clock. Like, I love it. I love the first round of the playoffs. It's my favorite.
I thought you were specifically talking about Toronto choking because I love that.
Hey, I think listen, I'm going to say it. This might be their year to get out of the first round. I don't think they're winning
That's what my brain says. My heart hopes I'm wrong.
I would love for them to run into Boston in the second round. And just get run out of the building.
Oh my God. Can you imagine? Like, that would be a hilarious timeline if they find a way to beat Tampa and it's like the whole Toronto sort of thing. Oh, they
slayed the dragon.
They slayed the dragon.
Yeah.
And then just to end up getting patted on the head by the Bruins after the previous times that the Bruins have beat this Leafs core in the playoffs as well. Like, that would be hilarious.
That's you know what?
They would be the most celebrated team that's won one playoff round.
Well, what was it? They'd be like, "Oh yeah, they earned our respect in the
handshakes." Put up the banner. They put up the banner.
Well, that would be the best thing. We go ahead, Alex.
Austin Matthews would get Conn Smythe votes if they got out of the first round.
There's going to be a banner at the arena. Won a first round playoff series.
The perfect scenario for me out in the East is Toronto wins Game 7 against the Lightning. They do it. It's overtime. They win it. And then they get swept in the second round by the best team that we've seen in the NHL in a very long time.
Those 4-1 collapses where they the fan base thinks they've got it in the bag. You think? Then the Leafs are hold my beer. We're gonna completely blow this, and they do.
Yeah.
And then they cut to that shot. They cut to that camera outside. I don't know what they call it, Leaf Square or something like that. And there's just these there's hundreds of these hopeful Leaf fans that have just seen their dreams crushed again, and it's beautiful. It's a beautiful time of the year.
That's true, and we would probably see more face paint, everybody coming out for a Game 7 than you would if the team's already down 3-0. Yeah, okay, that's I'll change my thought then. I'm gonna go with that being the thing. Toronto. So I'll flip it. My ideal situation for the East now is Toronto sweeps Tampa Bay and then loses in Game 7. Because then if you sweep that first round, the confidence is high. You're ready for the best team in the league. That's the ultimate scenario.
Either that or they choke another Game 7
worst
in the
series.
Round.
Worst series that you see here.
Dallas, Seattle.
Dallas, Seattle for sure. I'm with that too. Yeah. I won't even ask you, Alex. I know you're on that one too. All right. I think we'll close things out.
That's the one that you forget. You forget it's gonna even. You forget there's a game that night. That's.
They were playing tonight?
That's the game. Yeah, that's the game where it's hey, there's 2 games going on. I don't even care what the other one is. I'm watching that one instead. All right, we'll wrap things up there.
Ottinger had another 35 save performance, and they won again. Oh, okay.
Yeah, Jason Robertson, 2 goals. Yeah, we know the script. We know the script. All right, we'll wrap things up for another week here. We are back on Tuesday for the show. I didn't really get an opportunity to do this yesterday with quads, but I just wanted to thank everybody I try and do it often here at the end of the week because this is kind of the end of the season. We had our final Canucks game of the year last night. This has been a blast to see everything evolve here on YouTube. I appreciate everybody that I see, the same names in the chat every day. It feels like since we launched this thing, it's been pretty awesome seeing some new names pop up and now consistently show up here for the show. That's been a blast. Harm, you've been a treat to have in here every single Friday. We'll keep it going a little bit into the playoffs. Not sure how long. We got to give you a break too. We also have to give our wallet a break from your fee that you charge. So wanted to thank you for everything you've done this season. Anything you want to say to the folks on YouTube, everybody on the podcast? We're happy to have you. It's been a couple of years now with you in the Canucks Convo, and it's been a blast having you here.
Yeah, honestly, man, it's so much fun doing this every week through the season, and I'm just grateful for the opportunity that you guys give for having me on the podcast, and grateful to the fans for sticking through it. Right, it's not easy being a Canucks fan, but the loyalty that
especially when you commit like this, you commit to come watch us on YouTube and stuff. Like that's a different thing than just wearing a hat.
Exactly. And so I've said this before, but the payoff when eventually this will turn, right? Things aren't, I promise, things will turn. Things aren't always as bad as it seems in the moment. It will turn. And when it turns, the feeling of satisfaction knowing that you followed a team from the ground up, that you watch this core grow, seeing the individual sort of maturity from players like Pettersson and Hughes turn promise and potential into reality, that will be so rewarding when this team is good again, and it's going to make everything worth it. So I just want to drive home that no matter how high or low things get, it'll all be worth it in the end. And just want to thank all the Canucks fans for keeping up and supporting the content and always being so passionate.
I love it. I think that's also good job security from you, because I think it's going to be a while until we see that Stanley Cup here in Vancouver. You might get another 40 years out of your career of that, just from that last little speech there, Harm.
I hope it happens in my lifetime.
Yeah. Hey, you're too young to be saying that.
Well,
come on.
I mean, knowing the history of this franchise.
Oh, man.
It's a fair question to wonder for anybody who's born right now.
No, it's fair. It's fair. You never know.
There were Leaf fans saying that in the 80s.
Oh, gosh. Alex, anything you want to say to the YouTube folk before we get out of this? Is kind of our end of the year show. We're going to continue next week. I've mentioned it Tuesday, Thursday, and expecting you on Friday as well. Anything you want to mention here, Alex? I know you've been everybody's enjoyed you as a part of the show this year because of the YouTube and you producing this show.
Yeah, I just mentioned it there in the chat. Thank you, everyone, for showing up. The show would suck without fan engagement, that's for sure. So we every show we need all that all you guys coming in and chatting and bringing the topics. How many times did the chat dictate what you guys talked about? You guys had a whole plan, graphics and everything, and then the chat would start going off on Tyler Mott or something like this, and you guys would have to pivot. And the fan engagement has been awesome. It's great seeing all the same names in the chat, and everyone knows the show, and it's been really, really neat. And jumping in and being part of the Canucks community this year.
Yeah, absolutely. And I got to say big thanks to you as well, Alex. You've been an awesome addition to what this show was. I think we've evolved because of having you as a producer with your graphics, with the work you put in behind the scenes. I hope everybody in the chat recognizes how much you bring to this show as well. And I'll tell you what, I don't think we'd be on YouTube without you, Alex, because no offense to Aaron, but we've tried a bunch of Aaron, and the shows have not worked out as well. Alex, you deserve a ton of praise, and Aaron's our clip master, that's for sure. So thank you to you, Harm, to you, Alex, to all the great folks. I do want to say this as well before we get out of here. We appreciate everybody supporting the show. It's incredible to see on social media, whatever it may be. But the folks that contribute to the Patreon, the folks that contribute by seeing the people that sponsor this show, Zephyr Epic, they've been great. Betway, the support we got from them throughout the season. I tell you what, Atlas Goods, the great folks, just go out and try the pork rinds. I'm going to tell you, I know people don't go out there and choose pork rinds. Try these ones. They're excellent out of the air fryer. These companies, these people, that's what it more is. It isn't the companies that are sponsoring us. It's the people we're dealing with. The people that I deal with at Zephyr Epic have been incredible for years now. They've been supporting us. Our friends over at Atlas Goods as well for years now. They've been supporting us, the poll question, everything. It's the people from those companies that have been awesome to deal with. Please, if that's anything you can do, support those companies that are supporting us, because without them, honestly, we would not be doing this show. Because Harm charges too much and I don't have that money to pull out of my pocket.
Stop it.
All right. Support those folks, the great folks supporting us. We'll be back next week. We are going to take Monday off. It's going to be a big weekend with Canucks news. We'll have a huge show on Tuesday to wrap it all up. So we'll close it out there. Close it out the season. For our producer, Alex Allard, for you, Harmon Dial, for me, Chris Faber, this has been the final episode of the 2022-23 season for the Canucks Conversation. See you folks on Tuesday. Light it up, Alex.
Thanks for listening to Canucks Conversation. Hit the subscribe button to never miss an episode.